If we were to compare Iowa and Penn State's performances at the national championships over the past few seasons, which team will have done better? Well, the answer may actually surprise you, so let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to Fanco Wrestling, and I'm super excited to get into this stats-filled video. I'm so psyched to tell you all about the Iowa and Penn State statistics on All-Americans, national champions, and more. But first, I want to tell you about this shirt that I have on, which is a newly designed shirt in the Fanco Wrestling shop. This is a great way to support the channel, as well as wearing some great newly designed, more comfortable and affordable gear. You can check that out down in the link in the description, which will take you right there. Now, I want to dive into these stats from 2016 all the way to 2020. And the reason I'm going back over these 4 seasons is because on those teams, Iowa and Penn State, we actually saw some guys who were still competing back then and are competing on teams now. If you go back further than that, it doesn't really give us much insight into the current teams. And even, looking at some of these things, some give us insight into how the teams could compete, some maybe not. But I want to tell you about some of these stats on the All-Americans, how teams were projected to do and how they actually did, how they actually ended up. I think that's super important to look at as we head into this next season. So looking at the 2016-2017 season, having all of that said and assumed now, we can look at how Iowa and Penn State have done. As we look, we see teams are on the right column in placing. You'll see red and green. Red means that guys placed worse than they were projected to do based on their seed, their rank, and green means they did better or the same that they were projected. So if they placed first and they ended up first, they were green. If they were seated first and they ended up placing third, that means they did worse. So and that can be in any different case. As we look in the Nick Suriano case, he was seated third. He could have competed for a national title during the 2017 season. Of course, he was injured, and so he didn't even wrestle the tournament. So technically, yeah, he did worse during that season, with that stipulation that Suriano wasn't actually wrestling, but it's still a stat that we have to throw in there. So this is the 2017 season, and we see guys like Gilman who wrestled well, just not as good as he was supposed to do. Even like a Michael Kemmer, well, not as good as he was supposed to do. And that's this season. We also saw whenever Penn State, they just went on a massive title run. They went 5 for 5 with guys who weren't even seeded first, ended up winning national championships, just like Vincenzo Joseph, Mark Hall, Bo Nickel. I mean, this was just Penn State's year to win it. So throughout that year, Iowa was actually projected to score 94 points and ended up scoring 97. So they did score better. And Penn State was projected to score 138 and ended up scoring 146.5. I mean, it was a record-setting year for Penn State. Absolutely stunning year. Scored about 15 or 16 points per wrestler, whereas Iowa scored about 10.8 points per wrestler. Looking at the average guys who were ranked and how they ended up doing. So that was a great year for Penn State. We know, okay, they had 5 champions. How can you compete against that? Well, then we look at 2018, where we start seeing some even more guys from Penn State's current lineup come into the fold here, as well as, Iowa. Now, Iowa had less ranked guys this year than in the past, but they ended up they essentially went 3-3. 3 better, 3 worse. Penn State, 2 worse, 6 better, which or the same as they were seeded, which is absolutely impressive. Now, this is the year where we saw Neville's and Rashid just not do as great as they were projected to do, but most of these other guys did really, really well. And on Iowa's side, they had some guys do better, some do worse, and that's kind of how it was. This is a year that Penn State actually did worse than they were projected, to an extent. It's tough when you have all of these guys who are ranked so high, and maybe they lose out on a match. He's still All-American, but they lose out on a match. But anyways, Iowa was projected to score 77, scored 97 points, so 20 better than projected. And Penn State projected 145, ended up scoring 141.5, about 16 points per wrestler. Iowa had 12 points per wrestler. And if you're wondering projected versus actual and what that even means, I took the seeds that these wrestlers were supposed to do, how it goes into the scoring algorithm and how many points they could score potentially, and then I compared that to how many points they actually scored. So this goes into a whole algorithm here. And that takes us to the 2019 season. And I want to tell you, I am going to tell you which team in my opinion, and not even just opinion, but based on stats, did better based on the points scored, projected versus actual, the seed to place, as well as how many All-Americans they had, champions they had, and of course team titles. So there is a winner, and there are some categories that may surprise you. As I've told you, Iowa has already, up to this point, have scored more points, projected in the past few seasons. And as we get into the 2019 season, this is where Penn State had a little bit of trouble. Mark Hall didn't win that national title in 2019, which was upsetting. Nick Lee didn't place as high as he was supposed to. But this is a year where, look, Spencer Lee was seeded number 3 based on a couple of things, but he ended up winning the tournament in the last national championships that there were. Austin DeSanto did better. Pat Lugo did better. Lugo wasn't even supposed to All-American and ended up becoming an All-American, which was huge for the team. And then Marinelli was, unfortunately for the Hawkeyes, a guy who kind of fell off at the national championships, was seeded number 1, ended up placing 7th. Penn State guys, most of them ended up doing really well still, winning or making the national finals at least, and that was huge for the team. They were projected to score in the 150s, ended up scoring 137.5. The biggest reason for that, the biggest drop-off, I believe was, Shakur Rashid, who was seeded number 2, ended up not placing at all. That was a horrible loss for Penn State during that season. Unlike with Nick Suriano case, Rashid just didn't place, and he did wrestle. On the other hand, Iowa was projected to score 80, ended up scoring 76. So right around where they were supposed to score, but not quite. And then we look at the 2020 season, and then we'll get into how these teams compared against each other. So into the 2020 season, these are how these guys were projected to score. So Iowa could have had a few All-Americans, same with Penn State. Projected Iowa around 149 points, and Penn State was projected to score at 97 points. Now, was that going to happen? We don't know. It's just too tough to tell. We don't know what would have actually happened at the NCAA tournament because they were canceled. Now, let's look at the projected points versus actual points. And over the past few seasons, Iowa has actually done very, very well for themselves, outscoring what they were projected to do in those couple of seasons. Now, Penn State, we look on the other hand, they've actually kind of underperformed in certain regards. Now, we have to take into consideration the fact that Penn State has all of these seeded guys, high-seeded guys coming into the tournament, and a lot of times it's unrealistic to have all of those All-Americans just because of the nature of the tournament. So, and we're looking at this case, projected versus actual points scored, Iowa would actually be the winner here over the past 4 seasons. Next, we look at projected versus actual All-Americans. And we have to look at, not just how many, because actually Penn State has produced more All-Americans. Penn State has produced 21 All-Americans over the past few seasons. Iowa's produced 16. So Penn State, wins in that regard. But as far as how many they were supposed to have, projected to have, this is another one where Iowa actually gets the edge here and ends up taking over Penn State because they had more guys who were projected to do well and did just as well or better, whereas Penn State had guys that weren't. And even taking into consideration the Nick Suriano, Iowa would still have done better in that regard. And then we look at the highest level that there is in projected versus actual champions. And in this case, Penn State is the kind of the clear winner here. You look at 2017, projected to have 2 champs, ended up having 5. Looking at the next year, projected 3, could have had 4. And even in that 2017 year, how crazy it would have been if Nick Suriano would have also won a national title. Not saying it would or wouldn't have happened, but how crazy would that have been to have 6 national champs? Iowa has done well. They've not done horribly. They're not projected to have 5 and end up having 0. But if they're projected to have 1, they have 1. Now, it's not always the same guy. I mean, you look back in 2017, Gilman was projected champ, but Corey Clark was the only one who ended up winning the national title. And that really brings us to which team is the overall winner here. Which team is the team that deserves the title of having the best national championship? So first, I said Iowa wins based on projected versus actual points. Looking at seed to place, this is where actually Penn State has done better. They've had 17 guys do better or just the same as the place they were projected. 9 do worse. And Iowa, on the other hand, had 9 do better or just the same, and 12 actually do worse. So in this regard, Penn State would win in that battle. All-Americans, like I said, Penn State has more, but Iowa has done actually better than their projections. projections, the champions, looking at champs, Penn State wins, and then looking just at the team race overall, yeah, Penn State has won all those national titles, so you have to give the team race to Penn State. And in that regard, Penn State ends up winning against Iowa in these projections. But it's just very interesting to look at each of these stats, seeing that Iowa didn't do as bad as some people say they have done. Now, if you're interested in checking out this Iowa Hawkeyes themed shirt, you can check out the Fanco Wrestling store at the top link. And if you want to check out another wrestling video, you can click this link down here that'll take you to there.